I think this is a really nice turnout today. And really thank everybody for coming, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Love this. There's nothing like coming back into a bookstore and having real live people with real live authors, you know, and let everything go wrong or go well. It's just nice to do that.
Sorry. I
Yeah,
thought they were clapping for me.
You're special too.
We were.
It's always a delight to have these two authors back with us because they consistently write these very interesting books, and they give us characters that we love to follow and find out what's happening next. And so it's always wonderful. I always use a cheat sheet because my mind goes blank. But Sheila is back with us. It's been several times for both you ladies. It's been at Book Carnival, and I really appreciate that. Sheila is focusing on The Last Door this time, her newest book, and Connie, The Serpent's Doom. But all of their books are up there, as I can tell, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just about. Well, come on.
Of
The
that
current.
series, yes.
Yes, thank you. So let's welcome them and let's see what they have to say about themselves.
I've been elected to start. Is it?
It's
Yeah.
sit
Okay.
down.
Can you hear me back there? So before we start talking, are there any burning questions anybody needs to ask? Nope, okay. By the way, how many class of 67 people do we have here?
Woo!
Yay. We're having our 55-year reunion we had last night. So,
Wonderful.
thank you for coming. I'm going to speak for a while about my stuff. So, don't start thinking, how long is she going to be talking? I'm going to talk for a few minutes and then hand it over to Connie. And I thought what I would do is, because, my first series, the Claudia Rose Forensic Mysteries, is the one that most people know. But this series that I have now is the Beyond the Veil series. So I thought I would talk about the genesis of that and how I got to where I am here. My first 4 books in the other series were published by Penguin, and then my editor had the nerve to get married and move away. And that meant that I had to get a new editor, and she basically didn't care about my books the way the other one did, and she didn't offer me a new contract. And so I then got an agent who said, well, you're not going to get another big publisher like Penguin to pick up a series in the middle. So what I did was write a standalone book, what I thought was a standalone, and it's called What She Saw. It became the prequel for this series. And that book is about a young woman who wakes up on a train pulling into Ventura Station, and she realizes that she doesn't know who she is, or where she's come from, or where she's going. And she gets off the train in Ventura, and she meets somebody who apparently knows her, and stuff happens. So the amnesia theme is something that has always been of great interest to me, and I was really thrilled to be able to write. It's one of my favorite books. Well, after that, I dumped that agent because she didn't do anything for me, and I went to a small press, Suspense Publishing, who I liked very much, and they got my rights back from Penguin, and they reissued my first 4 books, and What She Saw, and then I wrote 3 more books with them, or 4, and I wanted to write a book about the world of spirit. Because, as some of you know, in 2000, my daughter was killed by her boyfriend not so far from here in Lake Forest. And it made me start wondering what happens next. And so I started doing a lot of research. And I always thought I would write a book about my daughter's life, but it was just too hard. But it was always there in the back of my mind. Now, fast forwarding to 2016, the man I was seeing at the time died suddenly of a heart attack. So again, the question of death came back, and I started digging deeper and thinking, I really want to write that book. Well, around that time, I'm kind of a psychic junkie, and I was, not so much more, but over a period of months, I went to see 3 different psychics, and they all said independently that I was going to be writing a book with my daughter. And I thought, that's really cool. So I started thinking about what could I write. You know, her story was too hard, but I could write a fiction story that had to do with spirit. I had all these other fiction books already published. And so I started thinking about it. And all of a sudden it occurred to me, like a little mini download in my brain, that I could write a fiction based on the young woman who was the star of What She Saw. And I could pick up her story 5 years later, and she is, at this time, we didn't know this in the first book, but she's been hearing voices. She's not crazy. She's hearing voices from spirit, and they ask her to do things like, you know, tell my father that I love him, or tell my wife that I'm sorry for the way I treated her when I was alive, and stuff like that. But she doesn't want to know anything about it. She does not want to hear that. So she's ignoring it. And 5 years pass. Well, all of a sudden, just in the same way, I get this little download telling me that I needed to use a character who was in, at that time, the last book in the Claudia Rose series, which is called Written Off. And there's a young man in that series, and I just knew he needed to be her love interest. And so I started developing a story around that. It was called Proof of Life. That was the, I don't know if they call it the first or second book, because What She Saw became the prequel. But Proof of Life, I picked that. I always start with a title. And it's a kidnapping story. And you know how when somebody's kidnapped, many times the kidnappers will hold up a newspaper with something current as proof that they're still alive. It's proof of life. And so there's that, but it's a double entendre because it's proof of life after Earth. Because what I learned from my studies is there is no death, but there's lots of life after Earth. And so this young woman's friend is an FBI agent, and he comes to her, and he has a case of a child that's been kidnapped by his father, and he wants her to help him because he knows about her powers or gifts, which she doesn't think of them as gifts. And so she starts to encourage those gifts and learn how to channel them, literally. So that was Proof of Life. And I really was anxious to write the next book because right around that time I had a reading with a psychic medium, Joe Higgins, who didn't know anything about me or my situation, and he brought my daughter through in the most incredible way. It was so her. And during our conversation, this thing came up about me writing a book with her, and maybe another book. And he said something, and it had to do with music and a piano. You'll see my little piano prop here. And I thought, oh, I've got to write that book. Well, I didn't get to write it right away because my editor at the time wanted me to write a Claudia Rose book, which I did. And then I came back to it early this year. I went to a party. Just remember, I always start with a title. I was at a birthday party, and the hostess was telling everybody, you're welcome to go anywhere in the house. Just when you go down this hallway, don't go in the last door. And I just immediately said, there's a title for my next book. And so I built a story around that. And the log line is, as some of you know already, when two sisters inherit a Victorian mansion from a stranger, it changes everything they knew about their past. And so what I'd like to do is read you one page, because reading from authors' books is really boring, but just to set up why I have a piano here and what part that might play in the book. So if you will indulge me. And I have a little quote on the first page that a friend of mine sent me, and I think he wrote it, and I think it's just perfect. Death is a human concept. Eternal life is reality. Above all, Love is never quiet. It rages or whispers. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So this is page 1 of chapter 1 of The Last Door. The news landed like a drone strike, exploding everything Jessica Mack knew about her life. And just as in the aftermath of an explosion, the air in the chic corner office was charged with silence. A glance at her twin's nearly identical face told her that Jenna was experiencing the same shockwaves that were thrumming through her own body. The attorney, her name was Tanya Stewart, wore a big smile in anticipation of a reaction to the letter she had read aloud to them. The implausible, peculiar, unbelievable letter that had made 2 sisters the heirs of a stranger. Questions wanted to tumble out of Jessica's mouth. Why? Who? How? But there was no time to speak or react or move. Shimmery waves had started to pulse at the edges of her vision and softened the periphery. The office was dissolving around her, fading into smoky shadow. Her body felt light, so light that she might float off the chair and keep going up, up, right through the ceiling and into the sky. Jessica gone. The attorney gone. She is seated at a grand piano, center stage, surrounded by an orchestra in a darkened auditorium. From off to her right and high above, a spotlight blinks on, pinning her like a butterfly in its brilliant glare. An expectant hush falls over the audience as her hands rise from her lap and pause, a moment of readying. She lowers them to the keyboard. Her fingers fly over the keys, artfully rendering the immediately recognizable for Elise, with such tender expression that Jessica wants to weep. The hands producing the music are hers, but chopsticks is more her speed than Beethoven. Jessica was only 8 years old when she realized that she loved making art more than she loved piano lessons. Someone, or something, has assumed control of her body, and she plays on until the last strains of a Chopin composition die away to thunderous applause. She reaches out a hand to touch the silver lyre stamped above the legend Steinway and Sons on the polished black surface. So, hearing this music for Elise happens many times during the book, and to find out why, you must read it. Over to Connie.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Well, like Sheila, Sheila and I are both survivors of Penguin Random House. Yes. My first series was a culinary cozy series about a soup shop in Vermont. And when the merger happened, Random House pretty much took over, and my series was cut. But the truth of the matter was, I was really grateful to be able to go back and work on my Zodiac mysteries. And the Zodiac mysteries feature Julia Bonatti, who's a San Francisco astrologer. And she came about because I got the bright idea. I had never written a thing in my life, not even a magazine article, and this, I think it was like 2005, 6, something like that. I decided that I would try my hand at one mystery. That was my goal, just write one mystery book to see if I could do it. Well, I decided to set it in San Francisco, a city where I used to live. It's also a city I love, and I also think it's one of the best cities to set a mystery in. And I wanted my protagonist to have an unusual occupation, not just to be a cop or FBI agent, but something quite unusual that would put her in touch with many people from different walks of life. And so I decided to make her an astrologer because it's a subject that I know quite a lot about. I'm, I guess you would call me a self-taught, non-professional astrologer. I became interested in astrology when I was young, just entering my second year of college, when my mother died very suddenly. and it was a tremendous shock, and of course a tremendous shock for my dad. But a girlfriend of mine dragged me to see a woman in Cambridge, this was in Boston, who was an amateur astrologer, and she was looking for people to practice on. And I said, no, I'm really not feeling up to it. There's too much in my life I have to deal with right now. She said, no, come on, we'll have fun. So I went along, and I met a woman, and we sat in her kitchen, and she drew up my natal chart. And she pretty much described the, horrendous time I was going through. And she also told me when that time would end, when things would become much lighter. And I thought, I don't think so. I don't think things are going to be hunky-dory in 6 months. Well, they were. And I thought, I have to learn more about this. And at the time, 100 years ago, there were not a lot of astrology books around, or occult bookshops. But I started to buy books, and I started to study, and I thought, well, I know enough that I can make Julia believable as a professional astrologer. So that's how the series started. And The Madness of Mercury, the first in the Zodiac Mysteries, was the very first book I ever wrote, long before I wrote the Soup Lovers Mysteries. My agent loved it. I was able to find an agent in New York. I didn't know at that time how difficult that prospect would be. But she loved the book, and she did her best to sell it, and she had no luck. One editor said, the astrology is too complicated for our readership. Some people might find the subject offensive, blah, 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 blah. 14 years went by, and finally, she sold it to Midnight Ink, and I think Sheila is also a veteran of Midnight Ink, which closed its doors. Were you published? No, okay.
Straight to Suspense.
Okay, yeah. Sheila's been spared that. So Midnight Ink picked up the series. They published the first 3 books with atrocious covers that I objected to. They wanted to really push it as a cozy mystery, and even though there are some cozy elements in these books, I would call this a traditional mystery.
Does everyone know what cozy is?
What?
Maybe you should explain what cozy is.
Oh, yes. Cozy mysteries, there are tons of them. And there's absolutely no violence, no gore, no sex, no hint of sex, no swearing of any sort. Maybe a damn would be okay. And that's it. So you're pushed into this little box, and you can't go outside the box, and you have to write a murder mystery. I grew up in New England, so writing about New England wasn't difficult. The Soup Shop in the other series was a great place to share gossip, to advance the plot. And I just wrote the mystery, which this series was described by a friend as Connie writes dark cozies. But there's no sex and no gore and no overt violence on stage. I'll put it that way. So my agent, after 14 years, finally got a nibble from Midnight Ink to publish these books. The first 3 were published. I was working on the 4th when Midnight Ink very suddenly closed their doors. So we were all thrown out into the cold, all of their authors. I was lucky in the sense that I had completed my 3, so my contract was clear with them. It took me about 1.5 years to get my rights back, and thanks to Sheila, who recommended me to the people at Suspense Publishing, who I really love, Suspense has picked up this series. So I started to sit down to write Serpent's Doom, and speaking of spirit, a very strange thing happened. I had an idea for a plot about smuggling, python smuggling to be exact, which is illegal in California. And a little 11-year-old Chinese boy appeared to me. I was sitting at the computer in my office, and I looked up, and it was a holograph of this boy appeared. And I knew his name was Frankie Chang. I knew he was 11 years old, and I knew he was in big trouble. So suddenly, the entire plot just gelled, and Frankie is basically the center of the story. And he's a character. He's a character. His full name is Franklin Delano Roosevelt Chang. And when Julia meets him, she says, "Really?" And Frankie says, "Yeah, my grandfather was a big fan of Franklin Delano Roosevelt." And she said, "Well, did he teach you about Eleanor?" No. And Julia says, "Well, let's try to raise your consciousness." So that's how her meeting with Frankie goes. As I started to write Serpent's Doom, I started to get a lot of email messages and Facebook messages from readers who wanted to hear more about Julia's feisty grandmother, Gloria. They wanted to know how Julia first became interested in astrology, how she found her cat, Wizard, and I know I was procrastinating writing book 4, but I thought, you know what, I've never written a novella, and I think I'm going to try, and I'm going to try to answer all these questions. So I wrote a novella called Enter a Wizard, Stage Left, which is in ebook only, and it's a prequel to the series, and it describes the death of Julia's fiancé, which is where the series takes off, how she found her cat. It features her grandmother, pretty much center stage, and it describes everything that every reader asked. So I was really glad I wrote that novella. It's been pretty popular. And then I settled down to write Serpent's Doom. This is book 4 in the series. And I have since written book 5. And in book 5, I finally decided that it was time for Julia to find out why her fiancé died. He was killed in a hit-and-run accident, which she's believed all these years, and all the cold case detectives that worked on it, that it was an accident. And suddenly she gets a little inkling of proof that maybe it wasn't. So book 5, which will probably come out next year, if hopefully Suspense wants it, solves that crime. And I hope to continue. I'd like to maybe do about 4 more books in that series, or reach an organic point where I feel it's time to end it. But I don't know. And when you sit down to start to write something, you really don't know what kind of a journey that's going to take you on, or who will pop into your head or appear as a holograph. You just don't know. So that's how that started.
That's really cool. And I wanted to add, because I left out a little chunk of the story. I told you that psychics had said that my daughter would write a book with me, and so I didn't finish that thought. And when I would really have loved it if I sat down at the computer and she took over my hands and wrote the story. That would have been so much easier, but that's not what happened. But what did happen was, through this book, I would write myself into a corner a few places, and I'd say, what do I do now? And I would get like a little download answer. And one thing, I had written a scene, and this is in Proof of Life, I had written a scene where Jessica goes to hell, or dreams that she went to hell. It's up to you to decide. But when she wakes up, there's a big black X on both of her palms. And so I wrote that, and I thought, oh, that sounds kind of cool. And then when I turned the book in to my editor at Suspense, she said, well, what happened about that? And I was like, darn, I almost got away with it. So I asked Jennifer, well, what am I going to do? I need an explanation. And almost immediately I got that download of explanation that is something I would never have thought of. It was completely the opposite of what I had thought, and it was perfect. And then one other instance, my boyfriend, who I told you had died in 2016, used to like to ride his bike around town. He looked like Einstein. He had this crazy hair, and he kind of looked like a homeless person, but he wasn't. But he liked to ride his bike on the promenade at the beach. And I was writing a scene where Jessica was walking on the promenade at the beach, and just like what you experienced, here comes Arnie riding up on his bicycle. And I thought, well, okay, I'll put him in the scene. So I wrote the scene. Well, much later in the book, the same thing happened. Jessica was walking on the promenade, and Arnie wants to ride up on his bike. And I was driving my car and thinking about it, and I said, you know, when you write a book, everything has to lead forward. everything has to mean something if it's gonna be an interesting book, right? Well, if you're gonna be in this scene, Arnie, there has to be a good reason for it. What is the reason? And again, like instantly, I got the answer, and it was something I would never have thought of, and it really added to the book. So I do believe that Spirit helps us when we ask for it, and sometimes when we don't.
Yeah, yeah.
And yesterday, I was talking to some people, and we had some really interesting stories from the audience. So if anybody has any, I say ghost, it's not really ghost, but spirit stories that they want to share, we're happy to hear them. Just think about it, and if you want to, you
Yeah.
can.
It's okay. It's a safe place. The Madness of Mercury, the first book in the Zodiac series, my inspiration for that was the Jim Jones years in San Francisco. I was living there at the time and never paid the slightest bit of attention to Jim Jones. I just figured he's a crazy preacher. He's got his temple in the Fillmore district. And of course, when the congressman was shot and Jackie Spear was shot, but she lived, when all of that happened down in the jungles of Guyana, it was incredibly shocking. At the time, I can't recall any mass murders. That since then we've seen many, unfortunately. But I've always been appalled and fascinated by people who would turn over their life savings to a guru or a so-called church or any sort of a cult, just literally give up autonomy over their lives. And that's always been an area that has fascinated me, but at the same time completely repelled me and appalled me. And so that was a subject I wanted to deal with in The Madness of Mercury. And then the second book, is it okay if I talk about each book? Or,
Please.
yeah. The second book, All Signs Point to Murder, is about a real murder that I know of. I know the people involved. And when I found out who had been arrested for organizing this crime, I'll put it that way, not actually pulling the trigger, but organizing the crime. She was an attorney in San Francisco, and she pled no contest in court, and she went to jail. I think she may be out by now. She was accused of felony murder because she had set up circumstances that caused the death of her sister. And when I heard about it, I thought, oh my God, there's no way. This woman is way too smart to ever do anything so stupid, so reckless. I can't believe she did it. And so All Signs Point to Murder is essentially the same murder plot, but instead she is not the guilty party. So that's my take on that particular murder case. And Tale of the Dragon is the third book in the series. I spent years working in law firms, and so I decided to set the third book in a law firm where Julia's client is the managing partner, and several attorneys received death threats. And I was able to use my scandals and gossips that I knew about in law firms for this book, and I had a lot of fun. And I took revenge on one particular attorney I worked for years ago who was a nightmare, just an absolute abusive nightmare. I could use a lot of other words for him. And when that book came out, a former attorney at that firm, who has read all of my books, bless his heart, he told one of the senior partners at that firm that I had described this character as this abusive attorney. And I used the name Jack Harding because this man's initials were JH. And the senior partner contacted me and said, JH, is that a code? And I went, oh my God, he figured it out. I said, whatever you do not tell this person, he would sue me. He would really, truly sue me. So that's the story of the first three books.
Just say, no, it's not.
No, it's not. Well, because I described him so well, everybody that ever knew him recognized him. So, but yeah, he would sue me. or threaten to.
That's why my kids bought me a travel mug that says, "Don't annoy the writer, she may kill you in a book."
That's cute.
Yeah, he was the first to die in that book.
I've killed several of my enemies.
And got away with it.
Yes.
That's cute. And why don't we open it up to questions?
Yeah.
How about, anyone have any questions for the authors? Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Do the books have to be read in order?
To yours? No.
No, no,
Oh, good.
they are series, but they're all standalone.
But they're standalone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they have the same characters, but the stories are complete.
Perfect.
Okay.
Are you gonna write any more Claudia Rose books?
Yes, but I promised Spirit that my next book is going to be a memoir, which I've been resisting for a long time. Now, when my daughter died, I was going to write her story, and I decided on the title was Growing from the Ashes, because I'm a Scorpio, and the phoenix is one of the Scorpio signs. But as I said, I couldn't do it. But I kept hearing through the years from psychics, you need to write your own story. And I was thinking, it's so boring. I've had some things happen, but I don't think it's a whole book. But I've been convinced now that that's what I need to do next. And then the next Claudia Rose is called Unholy Writ.
Oh,
I like that.
How about you?
Well, the next one, Julia's fiance, who's killed before the series begins, she deals with it a little bit in the prequel. They were both grad students. They were planning to marry. He left San Francisco with his mentor, his professor, to a trip to Guatemala. Michael's interest was refugee studies, even though the other people on this trip were more into the Maya archaeology. So there's a lot of Guatemala and Maya in this fifth book, which I have called The Light Beside the Sea, which comes from the Maya creation myth, the Popol Vuh. And I liked the title. There was something about, the full title is The Light That Came From Beside the Sea. That's the translation. So I shortened it for the title. And that book actually was surprisingly easy to write, and I think it's a real whopper when Julia discovers why her fiance died, and a few other people died along the way as well. And it's difficult when your protagonist is not a cop if you choose to kill the bad guy, the murderer, you have to do it in such a way that your protagonist is not the murderer. She may set events in motion that cause that person's death, but the more I toyed with that idea back and forth, I thought, no, this has to end. This has to end with somebody's dying. I like to write really dangerous scenes to wind up the culmination of the book. And I finally figured out a way to do it. So the murderer does not die, but I can't say any more about it. Anyway, so I had to do a lot of research about the Maya and Guatemala, but I think I'm very happy with the book, and the beta readers who have read it have really liked it. They've given me some notes and really liked it. The next book, number 6, will be number 6 in the series, features Gail, who is the owner of the Mystic Eye bookshop, and her secret past, which she has never shared with her friends. So I'm working on an outline at this point to build the plot. But in the meantime, a couple of years ago, a couple of characters popped into my head. They were Betty and Flo. These ladies are well past middle age. They are both actresses, but there the difference ends. Betty has made a kind of trickling career as a commercial actress, and Flo has done quite well for herself. She has quite a big ego, and she has a TV series where she plays an alien in prosthetics. They can't stand each other. They're absolutely, Flo has a bit of a drinking problem, and she falls off the wagon pretty regularly, and she's about to lose her spot as the ambassador to the Kronops in this sci-fi series. So these two characters popped into my head, and I wrote a short story. That's how they come to meet. And I have submitted this short story to every magazine that will accept short stories, even MWA's latest, which is their anthology is Entertainment to Die For.
Mystery Writers of America.
Mystery Writers of America, thank you. The people who have read this short story really love it. And absolutely nobody will print it. Because Betty and Flo are not solving a murder, Betty and Flo are covering up a murder. They join forces to cover up a murder in this short story. So that's how those two started. I don't care if no one wants to ever publish a short story. I really don't care. I wrote it for fun, and I still like it.
Sounds like a good reader magnet.
Yeah, I might put it on my website for free. Then I wrote a book featuring Betty and Flo and a cop named Phil. And the subject of that book, I don't even think I gave it a title, is illegal organ trafficking, which happens a lot. I finished the book, I put it aside, I thought, I can't think about this anymore, and I went back to the Zodiacs, but now a couple of writer friends are bugging me, what happened to Betty and Flo? Dig out that book, read it again, and you're terrified when you write something and you never go back to look at it, that you'll decide that it's complete crap and you should probably just shred it, but it actually may be okay, so that's my next project, is to go back and look at Betty and Flo and see if there's a book there. Probably my agent will hate it, but that's okay.
See, that's the beauty of independently publishing.
Mhm.
You don't have to please anybody else.
Yeah.
I took my rights back from Suspense last year. As much as I love them, I didn't feel that they could continue to do for me what I needed them to. And so I decided to jump off a cliff and see, whether I would sink or soar. And the jury is still out. But it's been very freeing in that I can choose my own covers, and I can do, whatever I want. And when I was with Penguin, my last book was going to be Unholy Writ, the 4th book. And the new editor who came in said, oh, no, that sounds like a religious book. And I said, well, it's about a cult, And no, we can't do that. And so she ended up changing it to Last Rites, Writes. And before that, they would send, and I'm sure you had this too, they would send a cover and say, here's your new cover. We hope you love it as much as we do. And I would say, no, I don't. Here's what's wrong with it. And they go, oh, sorry, it's too late to change.
Oh, yeah. That one, yeah.
So independently publishing, I set up my own imprint called Right Choice Inc. And I get to make all the choices.
Yeah.
I would like to know what brought both of you ladies into writing.
Oh, well, I was an actress for 30 years.
Sorry, can you hold the microphone up? It's
Oh,
very
yeah,
hard to
sorry.
hear.
I was an actress
I
for
think
about
it's on.
30 years in Hollywood. I fell in love with the craft. I never fell in love with the business, and I had to have a lot of training. Once I signed that first book contract, I wasn't able to continue because it requires a daily hustle. It requires going through the breakdowns to see who's doing what project, who the casting directors are, sending stuff out, making phone calls, et cetera, et cetera. And so once I signed, it wasn't as if I woke up one day and said, I don't want to be an actress anymore. It was that I just simply didn't have the time, and this sounded so much more exciting to me, to actually be in control of a whole world, not just to play one little part in somebody else's world. And probably because of that, dialogue doesn't come hard for me. I have writer friends who say they really struggle with that. But I was working on, this was the eureka moment, I was working on a set of a mini-series. It was called Sleeper Cell. and it was a very male-dominated set. There was the young lead woman, and there was me, and I was playing the receptionist in the Sephardic temple who helps the undercover FBI agent posing as a Muslim terrorist fill out a job application. And I had 3 scenes, and I arrived, and I was told my scenes had been cut to 2, and then, you know, after waiting around for hours on the set, I was told it had been cut to 1, and I thought, oh, yeah, this is gonna be just total crap. I don't even want a copy of this thing. It turned out, actually, I did see it a few years later, and it was a pretty good miniseries, terrorist type of stuff. But I was on that set, and I had a trailer, and it was air conditioned, and it was 105 that day. And they had parked my trailer next to a chain link fence, which was right next to an exit off the Hollywood freeway. And I opened my little window and looked out, and there was a truck barreling towards me, and I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna die on this. And this was at the Hollywood Presbyterian Church. There's a big parking lot there. And so I had to spend most of the day outside in 105-degree heat with the makeup melting onto my lap.
Wow.
And everything was a delay, everything took longer and longer and longer, and I ended up chatting with the young AD, the assistant director, and he was a really bright young guy. He was very intelligent, very well read, very well versed in film, and we got sharing books and stories and whatnot. For about an hour we talked, and I remember going back to my trailer when the day was done to pick up my stuff, and I thought, I'm gonna write a mystery. I'm gonna write a mystery. I'm so bored playing receptionists that help undercover FBI guys apply for a job. You know, because, you know, 30 years of training, because you're constantly training, you're constantly in classes, you're constantly auditioning. But the opportunity to play something greater or larger doesn't always come. Or you get close and you don't get that job. So, but that's the life that I had chosen. And so I remember clearly thinking that day, I am gonna go home and I am gonna write my mystery. And it took me about 3 years in my spare time to do that. Now I can do it a lot faster, but that's how it happened.
Well, I always wrote. I used to write poetry when I was very young. And when I was about 14 and we came to the US from England, I was a Beatlemaniac, and I used to write stories about the Beatles. Some of my classmates may remember that. So I used to write these stories and bring them to junior high, Fremont Junior High, and my classmates would check them out like a library and read the book. But I loved mysteries because I'd been reading mysteries since I was 8 years old, and got an Enid Blyton book for my birthday. And I thought, I always want to write a mystery. Well, I became a handwriting analyst, and people kept saying, you should write a book. And I didn't want to write the book that everybody else had written, but I had an opportunity with Macmillan Publishing to write The Complete Idiot's Guide to Handwriting Analysis. And I made a deal with them. They wanted to pay me $10,000, which they don't do anymore, but
Yeah.
I would have probably paid them at that point. And I said yes, and they said, you have 12 weeks to write it. 352 pages in a very specific format. Well, at the end of that, when I turned it in, they were so pleased with it that they asked me to write more, like a section on compatibility and another one on red flags for pathological behavior. So I wrote another 100 pages, and when the check came, they sent me $16,000, and I thought, they made a mistake. But it didn't occur to me, you know, they asked me to do more work, so I got more money. So that was cool. And then the year after that, I was asked to write Handwriting of the Famous and Infamous for Barnes & Noble. And I still wanted to write a mystery, and I started putting it together. And, you know, the powers that be say, write what you know. And so I created Claudia Rose, a handwriting analyst and handwriting examiner, which are 2 areas that I work in. She's not me, but she does the same kind of work that I do. And when I first started writing Poison Pen, it never occurred to me that I would be writing a series. So luckily, when the first book, it was published by a very small startup publisher, but they got it sent out to Publishers Weekly, and they gave me a starred review, which I found out was a really big deal. And that brought it to the attention of Kristen Weber, who is a senior editor at Penguin. And so she bought the first 4 books, and I've already told you the rest of the story.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Do you both or either use outlines or just write as it comes?
Do we outline, or are we pantsers? Do we go by the seat of their pants?
I outline, because my very first editor, Penguin, I was, assumed that they would ask for a synopsis, and I hadn't worked out the plot very well. I had vague ideas. She didn't ask for a synopsis, she wanted an outline, a detailed outline. And I thought, oh my God, I have to figure out where I'm going with this. Because I got the 3-book contract by writing sample chapters, sending them to my agent, who then sent it on. So I did that for her. I wrote a very detailed outline. Everything was worked out. I do it in columns. So there's the main storyline, a subplot that will connect, red herrings, and the 4th column is any detail that I don't want to forget. So it was a great lesson. It was a great learning experience. So I always outline, and it doesn't have to be that detailed now, but as long as I have that, you know, when you're writing, and you get exhausted and you're tired and you want to fall into bed, it's a roadmap. So you can look at that outline and go, oh yeah, okay, I can write this next chapter. And so it's a support system, and it's a roadmap, and it really helps me anyway.
Yeah, I outline too, but loosely. I tend to, I get an idea in mind and I know where the story is going, and so I'll write the arc of the book, you know, what the main plot points are over 3 acts, and then I start filling in. So I'll have like a paragraph about each scene that I want to do, but then I don't look at it anymore until the end, and then I'll go back and make sure I covered everything that I wanted to cover. But yeah.
The X's on the hand.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that's my we all have our own process, and there is no right and wrong. It's what you do.
Sheila,
Susan.
you gotta write a story about going to a high school reunion.
Yeah.
Death,
Because there's some
murder at the
With a
reunion.
murder, right?
Yes.
Who shall we kill, Susan? Susan is a character in one of my books.
Okay.
In which one was it? It was in Written Off. It takes place in Maine. She's a school teacher.
Yes.
Yeah, she spent a lot of money at a silent auction benefiting the library
Oh.
Yes.
to be a character in a book.
be a
She
character.
wrote. So thank you for that.
Sheila, there could be something in there though, about a high school reunion and bumping into people
Old
50,
vendettas.
55 years later.
Kill off people you didn't like.
And people that you liked and people you didn't.
Ah, I might just do that.
And
That's a good
those,
one for
yes,
Claudia.
someone at the C-suite.
Yeah. Well, if it's a Claudia one, it has to have some handwriting stuff in it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people will write to me and say there wasn't enough handwriting.
Stuffed in the dead man.
Okay. As long as it's not cozy.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't write cozies. Okay.
Any other questions?
I've gotten to know Sheila through Susan, and while I'm not, my literary interests are in a totally different direction, but I'm fascinated with your spirit, and that I've had my share of those messages as well, incidentally, in an area having nothing to do with this. But it's very comforting, I think. We reach a certain point in our lives, and we're getting closer to that point every day. You know, as the clock continues to tick, and you know, our mortality becomes more and more apparent to us. And so I appreciate it's what you said earlier, there's much more out there than life, you know, so thank you, Sheila, that's
Thank you,
that's
Steve.
very comforting.
Thank you. Yes.
Do you also do any, like, writing for to try and get it picked up as a screenplay or anything? Are you doing options, or what do you do with that?
Well, I think when you're extremely famous like Michael Connelly or Stephen King, they come looking for you.
Hey, I've had 3 big producers come to me. Not that anything happened with it, but go ahead.
Yeah, often people will option. I think that's how it's done, which means they have the right for a certain amount of time and they pay you a very small amount.
Or nothing.
But ultimately they have to sell it to a studio and they have to sell it to a star, and the studio won't touch it unless there's a star attached to it. So it's very, very difficult. I haven't, because I'm a little biased against Hollywood because I had to deal with so much for so many years, so it's not at the top of my list. I'm kind of in line with Sue Grafton, who made her grandchildren promise never to sell to Hollywood, because unfortunately they'd probably make a mishmash of her books. I think Stephanie Plum's, Janet Ivanovich's first book, with the Stephanie Plum character, was made into One for the Money, I think is the title of it, and I thought the casting was all wrong, and I think it was a total flop, if I'm not mistaken. And it's too bad, because if you need to be like Michael Connelly and be an executive producer where you actually really have control. Because if you turned Harry Bosch over to a committee of 12-year-olds that just graduated from film school, I don't think you'd end up with a quality product. I know I'm a snob, but I think it's the truth. So if you are going to do that or pursuing that, you better get quality people to take an interest in it.
And if they ever make a series of my Claudia Rose books, I would like, this is my wish, is to have Amy Adams and Gerard Butler as the main characters.
Yeah, we know Gerard Butler, and I love Amy Adams.
Yes, you know. Tell
We'll
them,
vote
tell
for
them.
it.
Okay.
Okay, and I wanted to say, Steve, further to what you said, in all the people that I've asked and talked to about Spirit, all of the experiences have been comforting. Nobody has had experiences that frightened them. So,
Yeah.
for what that's worth, yes.
Have you ever delved into the, like Haiti and the voodoo and that kind of thing?
No, because I think there would be some frightening stuff there,
Yeah.
and I don't want to be frightened.
Yeah. I think this lady had a question down here. Did you raise your hand? Oh, no, I thought you did, yeah.
Well,
Okay,
shall we sign books?
yeah, I think it's time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.